Today we are going to start on Svastra and maybe do a whole little series going into Usura and Melisodes. We had a couple of requests that I'm not sure if we're going to be able to accommodate just because we don't have those specimens. But I'll reach out to you individually to see if maybe you have some that you're able to send and we could all look at. Was that all we talked about, Sam, in terms of what's going on next?
Sorry, were you asking me?
Yeah, I was just checking that was what we said was happening.
So next. I think we had a general plan to move into Usura next.
Yeah.
If things go blazingly fast today, we can do an introduction to that group, but and then Melisodes, and at that point we've stopped. Claire and I are working on pulling together a whole bumblebee group, so to try and do all of North America in terms of bumblebee identification all the way up into the Arctic, and that will tap into several different people who are experts in these different parts of the U.S. Not organized yet, but that's coming up.
I think those are main things. So keep sending requests in, and that is how we're organizing ourselves. Just like with the genera, it's not in alphabetical or by family or anything like that. It is based on what you need. And with that, I think Sam will take over.
Okay, thanks, Claire. I'm going to share my screen. And today is Svastra Day. Not so many species. I don't have a sense of how many Western species there are, but in the East there's 5. And we'll cover them all. I don't have specimens currently for Svastra compta. I've collected them only once, and I think I gave them away for molecular analysis. I'll point out that compta is an Oenothera, evening primrose specialist. It has very simple hairs, not compound hairs like many Oenothera specialists do, and I think is in and out of Svastra as a genus or in its own Anthomergus group, I think it was. But right now it's considered to be a Svastra, so we're going to keep it there, and we'll talk about it. It's very easy to ID. I just don't have specimens, and we'll spend time talking about all these things. So I'm in the Svastra guide, so you could also load that up if you wanted to. I have moved into a different set of tools, so you'll see all this material on the left-hand side is our guide building tools, because as I was getting ready for today, I realized that there were a couple changes I wanted to make. So you can see up here, just in case you were interested in this kind of thing, if you see up here, the URL has the traditional guide information up to there, guide equals Svastra. Then I told it I'm using my email address, so this is a little bit of code that gets embedded in the URL. And then I got a PIN number from Discover Life that allows me to edit it. That PIN number is good usually for only about 3 days. And when I do that, I can then see this next level of menu here within the guide. And if I want to, I can change anything about the guide. This is one of the things about the Discover Life that makes it very flexible. If I see something, I can make a change. If someone else has permissions, they can make a change right away to the guide. So hopefully we stay up to date. That's not always true because there's lots to do and things get put off. But that's what you're looking at instead of what you see, which is a much more simplified version because you don't have the permission string on there. I think Claire and I are working with a couple of groups who might start doing some work on guides out west. And perhaps we will, if anyone else is interested, we might make an announcement when we start those discussions. to introduce the possibility that other people can start making these modifications in other parts of the continent.
That's a good reminder also, if you have guides for a part or want to present on your own personal guides, anything that we could incorporate, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, and we also have still are pulling together people to do alternative genera guides that exist out there. Okay, so Svastra, here we are. If we just click the Has button, it's very useful. We see a presentation of all the characters in the guide, and we will go through these, but not as specifically as Kalides because there's fewer species, and but we'll discuss them sort of as we go through things. So I want to point out that a lot of these Svastra species basically can be told apart just by eye. And we'll see examples of pretty much everything. I don't have any male aegis or no male petulcas, but the guide tries to quantify that so you don't actually have to look at things visually or have a collection. So let's start with the females, and I'm going to pull a Svastra atripes here, and we'll see first if we can spot the classic shapes of the let me get to there, the spatulate hairs on the specimens. That I didn't actually try and confirm this, but I'm just assuming that we'll be able to see some of that, because it's often one of these things that you want to see several versions of it so that you have a better sense of what these spatulate hairs are. So, and often you have less than perfect specimens. So this is the area. Here's T1, here's T2. There's I think always light-colored hair band here of hair sticking out from underneath T1 on the base of T2. And within that hair group, sometimes really difficult to spot, are some hairs that we call spatulate. They're really kind of knife-like, spoon-shaped at the end hairs. Problem with this specimen, so I'm going to probably switch. That specimen has lots of moth or butterfly hairs in it. So I'm going to switch now to obliqua and see if we can spot those on this specimen. I should have looked this up beforehand, but I did not. I'll point out that obliqua has additional trickiness, and a couple of the others do too, of having lots of variations in its plumage, some dark, some light specimens. Okay, so we are at max power. We're looking at that T1, T2 area. I'm looking for a sense of hairs. These are probably the spatulate hairs, but they're not isolated enough to really give a good visual. And then you can see already how relatively tricky it can be, because there's a lot going on there. Am I looking at something spatulate or not? So here, for example, you can see some flattened hair activity, but not super obvious. Yet that is a character for Svastra that identifies it as part of the Svastra group.
I just want to let anybody who does not have access to the chat at the moment know that in the Microsoft Teams, if you go up to Files and go to the folder Pictures and Guides, and under Longhorn Bees, from when we were doing genera stuff, we have some screenshots of nice spatulate hairs in there. Okay.
So I may stop here. A lot of times you can see them also around the rim of the scutellum. Here's the scutellum. But nothing leaps to mind here. We did show some good pictures early on when we were pre-prepared to show those kinds of things. So now that I have this specimen of Svastra obliqua, let's go and take a look at it. So these can vary from almost completely dark, so this is on the dark end of the spectrum, to quite a bit and quite extensive amounts of light hairs. So if we go back to this area here, what we're looking at is they are, in terms of identification features that between the species would be in the females, and to some extent the males too. We're looking at the patterns of hair banding, light hair banding on T3 and T4. Sometimes there's no bands whatsoever. So for example, all hair is brown to black. So that would be probably atripes and obliqua. So yeah, atripes and obliqua can have completely black, but if we try and do only, we'll see that they're probably scored. Yeah, so neither of those two species solely has that because of all this variation. So both can be completely black or have clear and sometimes in obliqua quite extensive hair bands. So if we go back to obliqua, the specimen I have here, you can kind of see these little reflections in the rim. Those are the spatulate hairs, even though it's not very obvious.
Are we able to either make the white balance a little better or lighten the background a little bit?
Let's see what we can do here. Okay, there's, I changed the white balance, and then the thing. Does that help? Hopefully. I'll try and bring.
It at least gets us more true to color.
Okay.
Yes, we have in the chat that's
okay.
Lovely. And we're on obliqua.
Obliqua. And so you can see here, T2 and T3 have other than this basal one, have no obvious light hair banding. Here's T4, all dark. I'll show another specimen of obliqua too, to give you a little more sense of the variation. So here's a more light colored specimen. If you look here, you can see that the abdomen has some very distinct hair bands. So to orient you, it's upside down. T1, extensive white there. Here's our basal band of light hairs, which the theoretical spatulate hairs embedded within here. And here on T2, you can see the creeping in of some light hair band, interrupted, very indeterminate, that wasn't there at all, and the dark one. And here on T3 are quite prominent white hair bandings, and they often look like this, diagonal with a break in the middle. And here T4 has basically the whole hind end being with white hairs. While we're here, because we're just going to cover things probably species by species, other ID features of Svastra in general, and the females, are the hairs of the plumose hairs on the hind tibia. And in this species, they're always light colored in females. And they're all, again, I'm going to show you this to you once, but the hairs are all branched. So this just tells you that it's not Svastra compta, the Oenothera specialist, but you can see the extensive branching of the scopal hairs. This group, unlike say honeybees and bumblebees, it's not mixing the pollen with nectar to form a ball. It's really just a giant dust mop situation. So they have big hair, big scopal hair, lots of branches, and then they just push the loose pollen into these areas. So it can be full, but it's not glued with anything other than what the pollen already has. This is my understanding. And so you can see again, yeah?
No, finish what you're saying. We have two questions when you're done.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Are spatulate hairs present in other genera?
I believe the answer is no, at least in North America, but let's see if I can get this white balance better. Whoa. See if I can get the less light on this. All right, let's bring it up. I'm just trying to desperately see more spatulate hairs. So my understanding is no, there's nothing like this in North America. And if you have these spatulate hairs, you have a Svastra.
Okay, and are those diagonal interrupted bands in the middle of the tergites? Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Yep. You'll see in petulca that those bands look really different, and they form bands along the rim. So here is the rim of T2, and these bands are bisecting in a diagonal manner, again, different from other species in some ways, that space. So another thing to notice here in this species is the hairs on the hind legs are light, and that in the basotarsus area, they're dark. And they can, in darker specimens, let's move back to that, darker specimen, it can have more extensive dark hairs, but I think always there's light hairs involved here. So in this one, which is more of a dark phase of Svastra, you're seeing in the scopal hairs, pollen collecting hairs on the hind tibia, light here, but now in the basotarsus, it's also dark on the outside. So even at its most lightest, there's always, as far as I know, again, this species goes all the way to the West Coast, so perhaps I'm missing some things out there. The inside will, if this is all light, will have some dark hair on it. So another feature of Svastra in general, ID-wise, is what's going on the scutellum. So here is the scutellum. Well, let's get in a little bit closer. So here's the scutellum. And the tricky thing is that a lot of the hairs on the scutellums are rubbed off, and this often happens. And you would have to do a closer inspection on here, probably from the lateral sides. But what you would find is, and you can see this a little bit. So there are dark hairs, and this would be in a fresh specimen, dark hairs throughout, and we'll swap this out with another one. And then lighter hairs around the outside rim. So dark in the middle, light around the edge is a ID character for Svastra obliqua, and several of the others. In fact, most of them have that pattern. The exception being atripes, which is useful because it's very dark bee otherwise. So let me take this down. And here is a better view of that circumstance on a less beat up specimen. So, and this is the light phase one that we had. So here is the scutellum. You can see dark hairs in the middle. These are less worn out, and here's this greater density of dark hairs, but it's not the absolute rim. The absolute rim is here, which are light hairs. When we look on the sides, so the last feature I think that we're going to look at here for the females, and on the specimen, what you're seeing is a combination of dark and light hairs. And I think in some of the light phase one, we're in a light phase one, but I think that this particular species can get even lighter than this. But in most of them, what you have is light hairs towards the top. Okay, let me orient you. This is the mesepisternum, or mesopleura, if you will. There's the tegula. This is the front wing. And what you have is light hairs towards the top of that segment. This is the pronodal lobe. And then dark hairs below. So if, and that would
I have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Is the name obliqua because the hairs dissect the tergite in an oblique manner?
Sure. I don't know. I don't know the derivation.
We had a response for that I should read out loud. That makes sense for the origin of the name, but I believe the ones out here in Arizona are much, much lighter, like an all over tawny yellow.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you, Mary, for that contribution. Another question. So the variation.
Let's back up to that one. So the guide right now really is just covering Eastern Svastra, and you may, so are these Westerns, Svastra obliqua, different species or not? Good question. It's not a species group that most people have done much with, as far as I can tell. But we would want, if we were to expand the Svastra guide to throughout the U.S., we would want to revisit that and look at whether there's Western colorations. And at this point, it doesn't impact us unless that all light member of obliqua is out in the east, which I don't think it is. We just have lighter ones. But go ahead now.
And we're just confirming that the variation in hair color and banding occurs within the Svastra species. / are you just showing variations within one subspecies, obliqua? We have, I believe, the dark and light morphs that you're mentioning both occur in the same species, but that there are 3 subspecies with a lot of variability.
Yeah, I'm ignoring subspecies designations. There's also a bunch of subspecies designations for atripes. Because it's foggy to me how those fall out. If you look at, I can't remember who did it, but there's a, well, actually someone can hunt it down. There was, maybe it's LaBerge did a revision of Svastra, and he did, I'm almost certain it is, he had a map of North America, and he would show the variability in these color morphs throughout it. So I'm not dealing with whether one or the other is a subspecies or not here, because it's just foggy to me whether those are real subspecies or just part of this chain of differences in coloration. Again, a good place to play around with if you're a molecular biologist would be something like obliqua and atripes. Well, all species really, but I hope I answered the question there. Mitchell covers some of these too in his guide, and I'm not sure who came first, whether Mitchell published after LaBerge or vice versa. Here's that darker specimen, and you can see that the light hairs are, I think, absent up here in the upper part, and it's all dark. So the guide would cover that. So it would score obliqua for having both those patterns. A tricky species, it's also the most commonly shown up. I would call Svastra high quality bees. So if you have Svastra on whatever property or pollinator area, you're probably doing something right, because they seem to be associated with larger fields and more biodiverse fields filled with yellow composites and other composites. Okay, so let's move now. So we've mentioned several times atripes, which I consider to be sort of the second most common one. And it also is something, if you're ever around partridge pea, I can't remember the genus of that. It's always worth looking for Svastra atripes. They also seem to like thistles. So just a couple hints for hunting them down. And what we are going to look at is a very dark bee overall, particularly the abdomen and legs. So if we look here, the scopal hairs, let's see if we can get the lighting a little bit better. There's something. So if we look at the legs, it's all black and a very dark black. So obliqua, when it was dark, tended to be a chocolate or fuscous color of black hairs, but atripes, very, very black, all black, and that helps pretty much. That may, in the east, give you the species right there. You can see in this specimen that here is our band of spatulate and other hairs, right? Not every hair is spatulate based, but this is that band that always exists. Why spatulate hairs? I have no idea. Why is that band there? I also don't know. But this is all dark. So that's a general hint that you should be thinking atripes. Additionally, you would expect something so dark to also have darkness in other parts of the body, but if you go to the scutellum, also something that always tells this, I think, from all the others, is that all these hairs are light colored right there. And you also see in the scutum, but the scutellum is, I think, the character we fixed on. These are all light, and I think it's the only one. Let's check. If we go to, I'm going to take this off, female, and we're going to go down to the T4, T3. Oh, maybe it's in the males. At the scutellum. Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's a male character. We'll get to the males too. Yes, scutellum color has all yellow. And, well, atripes and compta. That's a really easy character to tell compta apart. So let's go back to females, though. I obviously confuse the two, so I'm not 100% sure whether the scutellum also has all light hairs only in atripes in the female, but it very well may be, but the all dark, very black hairs on the scopal things are pretty much always identify it to species right off the bat.
Can you scoot it back to the scutellum? I missed a screenshot.
Okay. So if anyone knows whether they only have that, because I just have the character in the females, that would be good to know. So the character I was showing you were male. The scutellum character is a male character in the guides, but probably goes for the females too.
I have it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's see if I have it in the males. I'm looking for some of these light. So what happens in the definitions of atripes, here's one with some, varies a little bit depending on how much white banding shows up in the on the tergites. And I'm not really seeing much here. The atripes with white banding. So there's some, but this could also be just part of the band that normally would be there. But in other species, you'll see white bands coming in on these segments, thin white bands, very bright. And we do have that in the males, but this tends to be what the definition is for the subspecies of atripes. You can see all black hairs again, although quite a bit of white pollen in there. All right, so put that back. Yeah, I don't have any females with extensive white, but I do have some males. And yeah, oh yeah, good. I've got some from Texas. Okay, so now let's move to petulca. So petulca in both the males and females is pretty easy to ID. So you would be looking at the spatulate hairs, which I'm not going to try again, but they're there. But in the T3 in particular, here's a female. This hair band here is complete along the rim and extensive, depending on how collapsed the abdomen is. You know, there's this area that's mostly hidden by T2 is without any white hairs, but you have this very thick, taking up proportionally much of the specimen hairband. This is a southern species. I don't think we have any records up here in Maryland. You can see in the scopal hairs, all light, no dark hairs whatsoever. If we look even on the basotarsus area inside, that there's nothing going on. But that hairband would tell you that it's petulca, if you had confidence that it was Svastra. So you can see, oh, it also looks like a Eucera and other kinds of related species. But again, you have to find your spatulate hairs. Oh my God, are those spatulate hairs that might actually be visible? Eventually we'll see some. So there's some pretty good, see the glints here? Those are the flat planes of the spatulate hairs. They're showing up. Again, not the most obvious character. I want to point this out. This is an older specimen, probably with worn wingtips, I would imagine, but you can see this axis down the length of the abdomen often gets a lot of wear and tear going in and out of nests and whatnot. They nest in the ground. And so here is that hairband, but on first glance, it would be like, well, it isn't a hairband. It doesn't exist. But what you see is the hints that it was more extensive at one point, and this has been worn off. Things like this can also get worn off and sometimes this T2 is quite extensive in terms of these big, thick hair bands. Here's T4, plenty of hair. But processing specimens or specimens that have been in soapy water for a really long time or poorly preserved, or if they were goopy, all this white color would turn to black, and sometimes the hairs can even fall off. But this, I think, is simply wear and tear. So, yes, it would be awesome if all specimens were this perfectly preserved and young from the nest. You can see here, this whole area is light colored hairs, has no dark colored hairs too. And complex hair is also part of it. Okay, so now let's go to Svastra aegis.
We have a comment. Svastra Chrysoni from Texas to Kansas does not have spatula plumose hairs.
Ah, I wonder about Compta too, which is maybe I mentioned, but it had been put in a separate genus, so it perhaps won't have either. So that's good to know. And I don't know, maybe I need to go back and look at the genus guide and see if that's considered to be an absolute Svastra character or not. So, okay, good questions. And if someone finds out that we have no other means of getting to Svastra other than through spatulate hairs, well, we should fix that, obviously. And obviously we need someone to volunteer to take the Svastra guide all the way to the west, or at least through the southwest, which I think essentially would cover the west. So many things. Okay, so here's Svastra aegis. You can see just by looking and inspecting the hair that you have quite a different set of hair bands here, although here we have some of the obliqua pattern where there's a diagonal. You'll see this show up in atripes at least too. So for the genus, it seems like running your hair bands at a diagonal and a break in the middle could be a thing. If we look at the legs here, we see those are very bright colored. Let's see if I can bring down the lighting. Not much. They're filled with pollen, so it's not particularly useful. But you can see all the hairs. I think it's pretty clear that all the hairs are pale. That separates out the atripes and the dark colored specimens, and most of the specimens in the east of obliqua. And look on the side, we have the same sort of thing going on. The other side there, with all light colored hairs. And I think we'll see this in the males too, but you have the dark hair on the scutellum, you have the dark hairs in the middle and the light hairs around the rim on the scutellum. I'm going to, let's see, does this have good antennae? It has good enough antennae. When we look at, well, I'll do that when I have the males, which is a great character that separates out compta in the males. So at this point, I've gone through all the females, and I'm going to switch to males. So are there any female questions at this point?
We are wondering if you have any Duplocinta good Western species to share.
No, I don't. I don't have, and the other issue is I don't have access to the Smithsonian collection right now. So I don't, and the guide hasn't covered that yet. So I alert people to the fact that we would love to have them covered out there, and it's not difficult to work with us because we'll just work with you directly, so you don't have to know all these, like which features need to be added and how you log in and that. We can work with you on simply scoring a Western species for the set of characters that we have in the guide now, and developing additional characters, and we can put them up for you with maybe the notion that in the future you're more an active partner in that. So we would love to have some of those species added. So
Two more things.
Pardon?
2 more questions.
Okay.
Are there only light hairs between the forewing and the last species you showed?
Between the forewing?
Below, sorry.
Oh, below. I believe so.
Okie dokie. And how would you distinguish between light morph, obliqua, and aegis?
So I think that, particularly given what we heard about in the Southwest, and that we I think that deserves further exploration. Mitchell, I can't remember, had his character for separating out aegis and obliqua didn't make any particular sense, but they do look pretty similar, I think, overall. So right now, the separation would be all pale, and also the fact that I think most of the mesepisternum being all pale, and the fact that when you look at the scopal hairs, it's all light. And so here's the basotarsus in this area, although slightly darker, is really a, slightly darker shade of pale. Is that a song? And in obliqua, this is always, even in a light colored specimen, this is always basically almost black here. So I think those two in the female are worthy. I would be very interested in seeing some ultralight obliqua specimens and seeing if we need to go in. Also, if someone were able to track down Wally LaBerge's, so that looks a little bit darker under that one here. So if you look at this, that looks a little bit darker. So again, I think it points out probably we need some work on that. So I don't know how Wally's keys to Svastra work. So that might be worth looking up, and maybe afterwards I'll look that up too, because I certainly modified the guide today already.
Joan shared the paper, so I might send up a follow-up, or at very least it's going to be posted in the Teams.
Yeah. So how many? I was going to say I don't believe there's that many species. So I think it's a relatively easy lift in the scheme of things to score using Wally's work and then hopefully having some specimens on hand, which we don't, the Western species, and add them to the guide. That would be nice.
Jean also says, per Thomas Say, 1837, regarding obliqua, tergum fasciate second segment with an oblique band.
There you go. Thank you, Jean, and very intuitive observation from the group. Okay, so males. So let's start. We'll start with, oh, why not? We'll start with atripes. If you go back to the has thing here, and we look at the questions that are going to show up, it's very similar. We get into a sort of a more complex collection, which, you know, ultimately maybe deserves being broken out of the patterns on T2, T3, and T4, and the color of pale hair bands, which I think is maybe a little overwhelming, and perhaps we should be breaking this down to separate ones for T2, 3, and 4. This is a very early guide. We tend to do that now rather than, you know, you just can't keep several things in your mind at once, basically. But you can look at the patterns, and this is designed to express those patterns. We have T5 as separated out, whether it's light or dark, or has light hairs at all. The male antennae, so this is the one I don't have. I'll show you male antennae of the others' point of view, and it's very clear though. Compta F1 is approximately equal in length to F2, and in the others, F1 is super short, much more shorter than F2. No reason to conflate the two unless you don't look at the antenna. For some reason, I missed this perhaps because Compta was not in the guide originally, but I just put that in today. So you guys won't see this until tomorrow, this feature in the guide, but it is in mine. So my copy is a working copy, and then it gets propagated over to everybody overnight. We have hind leg color. So here we have this back of the basotarsus thing, all light, mostly dark, and then we have the scutellum. So let's take a look at several examples. So I'm looking at atripes now. So atripes in general in the male, let's flip over. It tends to have the overall aspect is very dark hairs contrasting with very white colored maculations and hairs. So the other species, things are muddier. The dark hairs are more fuscous or chocolate brown, and the light hairs tend to be more on the off-white to even yellowish tan points of view, and the maculations tend to be more yellow than white. Let's see if we can change this, but you can see those colors show up there. Additionally, in the vibe, oh, this is a dark one. So here, which tends to be more northern where we get more of these specimens, here you can see there's really nothing much on this specimen in terms of, it's also worn. You can see from the wing edges, really old. So it's possible some of the white wore off. White hairs theoretically are more prone to damage than dark hairs because of melanin. So let's see if I can get here we go, a different specimen. Does this have light colored hairs on it? Oh, I see the one. Yeah, here's one with these clear bands on, where is that one from? This indeed from Texas. I think there's even a Florida subspecies at one point was identified. So here you can see aspect is very similar, very white hairs. These are really white, bright white hairs, and they're clearly banded on the abdomen. This area that would have the spatulate hairs also has what amounts to these white hair bands expanding out the edges has been seen elsewhere. T5, very black, legs in all these atripes, all very dark hairs, no sections of white. If we look at the antenna, this would be in contrast to how Compta runs, but this is the other species, I think, tend to be pretty similar in terms of their proportions. But you can see, like, no question, F1, F2, F1, way shorter than F2. Like, no, it's not even, it's never going to be ambiguous. Compta F1 would be about the same length as F2. We're clearly not there. Quite a difference, and you could see why people would put that species into a different category. Okay, let's jump to obliqua. We have the same dark and light sort of circumstances, and so we see a lot of scoring for multiple states in obliqua. Oh, let me back up, sorry. I'm going to jump back to atripes and show that very nicely in the males. You do have this circumstance in the scutellum where this might be a little mussy, but the scutellum hairs are all yellow. So again, a little surprising because everywhere the back end is all dark, but these are all yellow, all these hairs, even the interior ones. And I believe, I want to say all the other species have a mix. So let's go to obliqua, and we will go to the scutellum right off the bat. Focus it. So here we have that dark in the middle, yellow fringe circumstances. You can see, oops, just knocked that antenna off. And you can see where you have in what's probably a darker form, a lot of dark hairs throughout here, but here's these light hair patterns. But in contrast, so you might say, oh, maybe this is atripes, but here we have the contrast with the scutellum clearly differentiating that. We move over a little bit and we can see the hairs. So here are both pale hairs and the basotarsal hairs on the, at least on the inside. In this case, all the basotarsal hairs are dark. So again, pointing to a darker form thing, whereas atripes, this would all be dark. So several ways to tell that from the others. And usually, not I think one of the guide characters, but usually we get a lot of dark hairs along the, in the mesopisternum area here too. So let's see, we'll look at another specimen. I don't know if this is particularly light colored. I think these are both, regionally we're in a dark colored zone for these. And yeah, you can see basically the same pattern. Although if we look at the leg here, hind leg is, you would call, I think, that entirely pale colored hairs. But if we turn it over, you'll see that on the underside of the basotarsus are these dark hairs. On the abdomen are some bandings of light colored hairs. In this case, T2 and T3 very clearly have these white colored hairs. In other specimens, my expectation that would change. So it would, Joan has, or Claire is going to get the Svastra reference up and available. That would be a fun thing to look through again. I certainly need to do that to revisit some of these guide characters for this to see if we need to broaden some of our definitions of what obliqua is. You can see in the scutellum again, light and dark hairs showing up. again, also seeing wear and the non-pristine nature. You can see the wingtips are frayed, so an older thing. If we go to petulca, which I do not have, we can look at pictures. They have that big broad band in the males too. We can jump to that, but let me show you our male aegis here. This looks very similar to the female one, and I think brings out some of these. Oh, that could be an obliqua kind of thing, but here we have. So we have the scutellum, dark in the middle, light to the sides. We have lots of banding on the abdomen, even more extensive than the ones we saw on obliqua, in terms of like here's 2, 3. These have widened now, not just spatulate hairs. 2, 3, and 4 with white hairs. We do have dark underneath, so that is a bit of a, obliqua-like character. And when we look on the side of the specimen, you'll see all light colored hairs. You don't have any of what our specimens have in obliqua, which are dark colored hairs. In Mitchell, which is very confusing, again, I want to go back to LaBerge. He talks about some differences here in hair patterns, which just don't make any sense whatsoever. He also talks about differences in that atripes has a shinier abdomen and the pits have less chagrining or dullness between, but, and we can look at that. So here, for example, is the T2, where he would identify as the area to look at. It looks like that, has a lot of density of pits there. And is that dull or not? A little bit difficult to tell. Anyway, we have not included that one because I'll pull out atripes out here. That it doesn't, like if you just have, in contrast, it does probably make some sense. But when you often get what you get, which is a single species of a Svastra, like, is that a whole lot different from that other one? If you were side by side, you would perhaps say yes, but I found it to be a weak character. So it would be nice to revisit this group in the guides. And I think, did I cover everything? Yeah, so petulca, we can just click over to petulca. Let's reset this and go to, so you, as I think most of you know now, you can click on the species page. We're always looking for more pictures here, but here's petulca's specimens, and you can see the big bands on the rear end of these specimens. Here's a male from North Carolina, and you can see there's T2 and I think that's T2. T2 and T3 and T4 all have wide bands. So that wide band thing is here's some others from the Logan lab that will help you out. All right, any questions?
Nothing in the chat right now, but you're feel free to unmute. We still have 5 minutes left.
I'll point out, I guess, in terms of characters, that the Svastra males, I'm pretty sure, have teeth on. Is that right? Let's just check. I was going to say have teeth on T7 and on T6, as well as rounded rather than flattened rims to the tegula. Let's go back here though and check that out while people are coming up with questions. I can't remember which of the groups. Was it Usura that doesn't have T7? So okay, there's a tooth always the question is, where did that tooth originate in? I can't quite tell if that's originating in T7 or T6, but I'm only at this, with that angle, I only saw one. These are often a frustrating group of things to try and find, given all the hair back there. I'm flipping this specimen over.
Tim would like to contribute that Svastra compacta does have the spatula plumose hairs.
Okay. So only Cressonii, the mysterious Cressonii, does not have them. I can't quite tell from the specimen. So, I mean, it's in the guides, and then the tegula is rounded. They're big bees. All of that, at least the eastern ones, are all pretty big bees. So that's often a good vibe separation for Svastra. And in the east, they all have spatulate hairs, if you can find them. All right, any other questions?
Going once, going twice. How is the color pattern of hairs in the legs of aegis?
Yeah, so in the female, it's all pale on the hind legs. I probably similarly on the front and the middle, but no one right now is using those for characters. In the male, they can be apparently all light. I'd like to have a bigger string. I really only have one male. A bigger string of those, and so they can either be all white or white with some dark on, like obliqua, some dark on the basitibial backside of the basitibial plate. I believe their color pattern is much more fixed with those strong patterns of light colored hair bands.
Okay, we're starting to see the closing thank yous in the chat, so I think we're gonna call it.
Okay. We're looking for volunteers to expand the guide to the west.
Yes, please. All right, I will post the guides that were shared and try to remember to send a follow-up email with those.
Thanks, Claire.
Have a good week, everybody.